Then we have Professor Izzat Morshidi. He'll be presenting on loneliness and social isolation. The research speaks on how loneliness is rooted in perception of one's social environment and sense of community belonging. Then we invite Professor Izzat Morshidi to please present.
Um, Hi, let me just make sure I can see myself and the slide as well. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and I believe it's the afternoon in India. I'm Dr. Izzat Morshidi. I'm within the psychology department. The title of the talk that I am going to be giving, initially, I thought I was going to present something along the line of loneliness and social withdrawal, but I've adjusted it a bit to reflect a publication that me and a colleague of mine in Singapore did a couple of months ago, which is more specific, looking into the hikikomori phenomena. So, sorry, that just jumped straight into that. Now, my particular research area focuses on emerging adults, in particular looking at suicide risk and suicide prevention. So this exploration on loneliness and social withdrawal is a recent development where I am interested in looking at how elements such as social withdrawal, social cynicism, increases the tendency of escape behavior, which then increases the risk of suicide ideation. So this is, for part and parcel, a very new area that I'm curious about to explore, but I thought I want to share this particular piece of research to invite discussions on this phenomena. So very briefly, hikikomori, or deliberate social isolation, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's a Japanese concept that simply refers to deliberate or intentional social withdrawal or pulling away from any sort of social interaction, social engagement, and often preferring to stay at home or within their own personal room for more than half a year, or even for a couple of years. Now, this definition has been quite problematic. There's no clear definition for what constitutes a hikikomori or cut off of when someone is diagnosed as hikikomori. I also want to note that hikikomori is not a diagnostic criteria, but it can be found in patients who present with mental disorders as well. Now, some of the biggest problem with this definition is that it is often framed within the normative understanding of what a healthy social engagement looks like. And when we think about this, it's often a more offline kind of framework where we think about this is how a healthy social relationship should be offline, it should be outside. People need to be able to touch grass. But it sort of missed the point of modern conversations and healthy engagement that can take place online as well. So how does this definition fit a situation when individuals actually do have very healthy, good engagement with people online? Another problem with this definition, obviously, is to do with the duration. So there's no agreement in the literature as to when do we start defining or identifying someone as being a hikikomori. But perhaps more interesting from my point of view and my colleagues' point of view is whether this is a particular condition that is unique to Japan, or is this something more of a society-bound condition that we are able to see in different parts of the world. And indeed, when we look at literature around the world, although there's not many, we are starting to see that there is instances of hikikomori, not just in Japan and East Asia, but also in countries within Europe and the USA as well. Now, my particular research that we did was based on this very complex model that was proposed by Cato and colleague. So this is a hypothetical model that they propose that integrates all of the different risk factors and protective factors that are known to predict hikikomori. Now, I want to draw your attention to those that I highlighted in yellow, as these are the factors that we, during the conceptualization of the research, felt that there is some sort of synergy or similarities, especially when we think about how all of these factors reflect a degree of pessimism and negative perception of belonging or the environment itself. And this brings us to several theories and argument that has been proposed as to why people are choosing to withdraw from societal engagement. And one of it is due to a rejection of social norms, especially within East Asian societies, where there are particular set expectations when someone reaches a age group. So, get married, have children, have a second child, retire, so on and so forth. And the argument that was proposed by the founders of Hikikomori was that a lot of Japanese youth, especially men, prefer to withdraw as a rejection towards the social norms that are put on them, rejecting the idea of rejecting their social expectations and social pressures that are put on them and preferring to live their own lives the way they want to. Now, some also argue that hikikomori or social withdrawal is a form of coping strategy as a way to avoid social pressure and highly competitive, stressful environments. We could see this in a review that was conducted among hikikomori studies, and we actually find that some of the elements also point towards a degree of uncertainty and confusion or ambivalence in terms of my role as a young person in my society. So a degree of feeling that perhaps there is no place for me to belong in society, or there is no value in terms of my being in society, and therefore I will escape and remove myself by living at home and being on the internet. And this brings us to the element of social cynicism. This is an element that we were interested in looking at because social cynicism is simply defined as the general mistrust and negative perception of people, institutions, and societal structures. So when we look at, when we sort of explore some of the concerns and worries that a lot of young persons have, it's not surprising that I've actually had a list here that you could see some of the motivations that may push individuals towards social isolation might actually be more common, not just within a particular country, but perhaps it might be more common globally. So when we think about how there is very little job insecurity, where there is high job insecurity, housing insecurity as well, student debt, political insecurity, so on and so forth, it's not surprising that perhaps a lot of young persons are feeling a bit more skeptical and pessimistic about their future and their role in the environment because there is just no place for them anymore, or very little space, especially when the environment is highly competitive. So as to not engage in that rat race, as to not engage in this highly competitive dog-eat-dog world, they may prefer going online because the online and the cyberspace environment provides them a sense of security where they could be whoever they want, and the pressures of society doesn't exist. So there's clearly a lot of argument as well as to whether the internet or social media is responsible for loneliness and social withdrawal. Currently, based on literature, as far as I am aware, there is no agreement as to the causal link between problematic internet use. And what I mean by problematic internet use, we're using a more general umbrella term that looks into social media use, gaming, so on and so forth, and whether or not that predicts social withdrawal. Some literature argue that, yes, problematic internet use increases social withdrawal because it is comfortable, it is secure, so individuals continue to stay in their room and therefore withdraw from engaging in society. But others also argue that the internet becomes a catalyst that helps people deal with rejection, that helps people deal with a sense of burdensomeness. And this sort of bi-directional relationship becomes an interesting contention in our particular research because perhaps the internet isn't really a risk factor at all. In our particular study, we wanted to test the strength, or rather, we want to test the role of social cynicism and compare it with problematic internet use to see which of these factors actually are more robust when it comes to predicting hikikomori tendencies. And we conducted this study in Singapore. Now, I am from Malaysia. Singapore is a neighboring country, but I've studied in Singapore, and the competitiveness in Singapore is really, really high. I've put some articles there, often talking about how there is this academic arms race in Singapore as young as 7 years old, where parents and society itself try to push students to get better grades, which then leads to better jobs. There's also a large concern of housing, which is severely limited in Singapore being a very small country. So the degree of competitiveness within the Singaporean community is very concerning. And so our study was looking at whether or not Singaporean adults, whether or not hikikomori conditions exist in Singapore adults, and if they do, is it better predicted by social cynicism or problematic internet use? So we tested a mediation model, as you could see here, and we found that we also took additional variables such as living arrangements and gender, and we found that there were no differences in hikikomori tendencies across demographic variables. But what's interesting in our exploratory study here is that we find that social cynicism has a more robust and stronger predicting effect than PIU, or problematic internet use. And this is quite reassuring, at least from our theoretical standpoint, because it does show that for the most part, Singaporean young persons who are highly skeptical about their place in the environment, who are highly cynical about their role, are more likely to withdraw from society, and that the internet or problematic internet use merely serves as a catalyst rather than a cause. So we summarize in our paper that this may be due to Singaporeans, Singapore's highly meritocratic and competitive environment that has been imbued to young persons from a very, very young age, that is not only perpetuated by the society itself, but within family systems as well. In our paper, we argue that perhaps a lot of social withdrawal and social isolation research should instead look at social structures, so institutions, governments, and social systems, and how they have been constructed, or the lack of avenues that young people could engage in that makes them feel that they belong in the environment, instead of always focusing on social media, the internet, and gaming. We argue that social media, internet, gaming, problematic internet use are merely symptoms of a larger public issue, and that we should really be focusing on spaces where young people can feel belonged. So that is the exploration that me and my colleague did in Singapore, which sparks a few questions which we intend to continue on. One of it is to run the main. Yep.
Time, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to finish this one right now. So we are interested in looking at a few things right now, such as testing this in the UK, but also looking at how we could manipulate certain media consumption influences, and how does that change social cynicism so that we could reduce social isolation behavior. But I'm just going to stop here. Let me know if anybody has any questions or would like to chat more. Thank you.